In the world of advertising, there's no such thing as a lie. There's only expedient exaggeration. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Stone Gasman. After about 10, 11 months, I am finally back doing another audio commentary. And tonight is a very special audio commentary for the 1959 Alfred Hitchcock thriller North by Northwest, starring Cary Grant, Eva Marie Saint, and James Mason, and screenplay by Ernest Lehman. And this is one of the Hitchcock classics, along with Psycho and Rear Window, 39 Steps, Frenzy, which I did a commentary on a couple of years ago. And I don't know if I would go so far as to call this my favorite Hitchcock film, but one thing is for sure, I have probably seen North by Northwest more than any other. Maybe Vertigo, maybe Psycho. I'm not really sure, but I think North by Northwest is the one that I've returned to the most ever since I first saw it at 11, 12 years old. So we got a lot to talk about with this commentary, but I just want to give everybody just a few minutes. Paused on the green MGM logo. I can't really explain why the MGM logo has a green background, but I certainly do like it. But at the same time, we got a lot to cover, so I'll just give everybody a few minutes to get queued up, and we'll go ahead and get started here. So why North by Northwest? Well, we are on the eve of the 100th birthday of Eva Marie Saint, who of course plays Eve Kendall in North by Northwest. And one of her most famous roles, she had won the Academy Award for her debut in On the Waterfront in 1954, which of course won Best Picture as well as 7 other Oscars. And the scenes that she has with Marlon Brando in that movie are spectacular. If you ever go back and rewatch it, I just rewatched it very recently. It's one of the all-time greats, and in fact, it was one of the first films to be selected for preservation in Washington. It was one of the very first ones to be preserved. So I mean. Yeah, and but Eva Marie Saint only did 21 films, believe it or not. She doesn't have a huge film resume, but one thing is for sure, she did a lot of recognizable films, some of which were huge hits at the box office. And North by Northwest is probably her most famous role as Eve Kendall. So at any rate, so I'll be doing more commentaries in the coming weeks, but I figured that this would be a perfect one to get back into the game and everything. But just to let everybody know, I am part of the Region Free podcast, which is on the Visited by Voices network. So every 13th of the month, you just go to the Visited by Voices network, and we have a podcast. And also I'm doing my episodes for 60 Minutes of Stone. And my next episode, which I'm recording very, very soon, is going to be a review of not only Psycho 4, but also Bates Motel. And I will also do a Psycho ranking. And that Psycho ranking is actually also going to include this film right here, Hitchcock, with Anthony Hopkins playing the director. And I haven't seen this since it came out, so I'm looking forward to watching this again and cruising through all the bonus features and everything. But at any rate, why don't we go ahead and get started here? We are paused on the green MGM logo for North by Northwest. So we can count down on the count of 3, and we will go ahead and get started here as we we will see the MGM logo, and then we'll go into Saul Bass's very famous title sequence right here. So on the count of 3, 2, 1, and play. Perhaps the best way to frame Hitchcock's 1959 thriller North by Northwest is to examine the least conspicuous word in its title, which is by. In the context of the film, by represents a crossroads, a point of intersection between two paths that would otherwise never meet. This title sequence is split into three distinct tiers. The first being entirely graphic, with the title superimposed over the gridded background. In the second, the graphics dissolve into the reflective facade of the CIT building in Manhattan, the location of Roger Thornhill's advertising agency, perfectly mimicking its orthographic window framework. The third tier brings us down to a ground level, observing the anonymous masses navigating the Big Apple. This progression from cold abstraction to perceived reality, symbolically reflected in the building's facade, to up close and personal parallels Thornhill's journey through the film, mirroring both his plight and his changing identity over its course. It also draws the audience into human scale conflict, where commuters do their best to ignore each other unless compelled otherwise, resulting in hostility. Bernard Herrmann's big climactic score gives the sequence a sense of increasing urgency, turning up the volume in concert with the march of the crowd. Bass has experimented with graphic animation techniques as far back as A 7-Year Itch in 1955. And if you remember in that Billy Wilder film, the title sequence was like a bunch of picture boxes that would open up and reveal a credit behind each one. And the directorial credit for Billy Wilder was amusingly sprung out like a jack-in-the-box, and everything. Associate producer Herbert Coleman. And we are about to see, of course, here's Alfred Hitchcock's directorial credit. And as soon as the credit leaves the screen, we see the master himself just miss the bus. So Saul Bass had experimented with graphic animation techniques as far as A 7-Year Itch, but the title cards themselves had always remained static. North by Northwest is often credited as being the first sequence to use the kinetic type, or simply type in motion. It is also one of the first examples of situational type in film, where the text is integrated into the environment by matching its perspective, a technique famously revisited by Picture Mill for David Fincher's Panic Room in 2002. Now, we just saw right here crossing the screen, right here is Donna Douglas, her very first film appearance. She shows up in the opening in the film after they step out of the lobby, and she, of course, later played Ella Mae Clampett in the long-running sitcom The Beverly Hillbillies. So Hitchcock gave her just a quick moment there where she crosses in front of the camera and in front of our lead actor Cary Grant, and also Doreen Lang, who plays Maggie, Roger Thornhill's secretary. Now, Doreen Lang was born in New Zealand. Her live TV performances included the title role in The Story of Mary Surratt for Kraft Television Theater. Among her other television appearances were episodes of Studio One from 1954 to 1957 and the daytime drama The Nurses. She appeared as a guest star in numerous TV dramas such as Hawaii Five-0, The Mod Squad, Gunsmoke, Mannix, and The Waltons. And her first film role was actually in Hitchcock's The Wrong Man in 1956 as the character of Anne James. And she would also follow that up with an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents in 1958. And she would also be in The Birds, where she played the hysterical mother in the diner. Her other films included Wild in the Country, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, 1962, The Group, Brian's Song, A Death of Innocence, Death Sentence, Death in Canaan, Like Normal People, and Almost an Angel. And she died of cancer in 1999 at the age of 84. Now, the song that's playing in the lobby of the Plaza Hotel before Thornhill enters the Oak Bar is It's a Most Unusual Day, which had previously been sung by Jane Powell in the MGM musical A Date with Judy. Now, Sir Alfred Hitchcock had planned this movie as a change of pace after Vertigo, which unfortunately was kind of a flop. I mean, of course, nowadays it's considered by many people to be the master's masterpiece. But in his book-length interview, Hitchcock-Truffaut, 1967, with Francois Truffaut, Hitchcock said that he wanted to do something, quote, fun, lighthearted, and generally free of the symbolism which had permeated his other movies. Now, as you'll see all the way on the right side, are two gentlemen right here who are basically the thugs who hear George Kaplan's name in the Oak Bar. We don't know who George Kaplan is, of course, yet, but he's supposedly staying at this hotel. And once they hear his name, they automatically conclude that he is George Kaplan, even though Roger Thornhill, an advertising executive, ad man, just wants to send a telegram to his mother, who is playing bridge. Now, the two thugs right here, on the left is Robert Ellenstein. His character's name is Licht. I don't know if we hear his name in the actual movie, and he's actually going to disappear after the first act. But the actor's name is Robert Ellenstein, and he was in the original 1957 version of 3:10 to Yuma. He was also in Love at First Bite, which is the George Hamilton comedy from 1979. And I always knew him also growing up as the Federation president in Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. We see him in the beginning as the Klingon leader is complaining about Captain Kirk and how they destroyed one of their warbirds and everything. And then the Federation president also appears at the very end, dropping 8 of the 9 charges that the Federation crew has been faced with. But after they saved the planet and with the help of some whales, the only one that got charged was Captain Kirk for defying Federation orders. And I always find it funny that Robert Ellenstein, he largely has a smile right here, while the other actor on the right, Adam Williams, has a very serious face. And I like those two reactions because, I mean, on one hand, this is a very serious thriller about an ad man whose life is in danger throughout most of the film, being chased by spies. But there's also a brilliant sense of humor, a wonderful, witty sense of humor provided by the screenwriter Ernest Lehman. And Adam Williams, whose character name is Valerian, he passed away in 2006, and he was in 1950s films like The Big Heat and Vice Squad and Fears Strike Out. Now, this mansion that they all arrive at here, this is a real mansion known as the Old Westbury Gardens. Bring that right here. It's a very historic house in New York City. Former estate of businessman John Schaefer Phipps, an heir to the Phipps family fortune in Nassau County, located at 71 Old Westbury Road in Old Westbury, New York. And the property was converted into a museum home in 1959, which was the year of North by Northwest's release. And it's open for tours from April to October. The painting of Mrs. Henry Phipps and her grandson Winston by John Singer Sargent hangs in the dining room. Winston Guest was a child, and his godfather was a Winston Churchill. Now, here we have the arrival of the villain of the piece, played by the great James Mason. And it's funny that in Hitchcock's experimental 1948 film Rope, his name was actually dropped in that movie, where somebody said that, oh, James Mason would make an excellent villain. And so Alfred Hitchcock finally cast him in the role of this Cold War spy named Philip Van Damme. Although it's funny that another actor that Ernest Lehman, the screenwriter, and Alfred Hitchcock had seriously considered for this role was actually Yul Brynner, who had just done the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical The King and I. But James Mason is so wonderful in this role, and it's actually really sad that shortly after this film was completed, he suffered a serious heart attack. And now he would live for at least 20 more years after that. But here we have another legendary actor, Walter Matthau, who, of course, later on won the Academy Award for playing Bela Lugosi in Tim Burton's Ed Wood, starring Johnny Depp. And the other one that won the Oscar for that movie was actually Rick Baker, who did the makeup. Now, in this scene right here, Cary Grant mentions that he is about to attend the Winter Garden Theater, the Winter Garden Theater in New York for a show. Now, this movie opened in July of 1959 in Chicago, and if that being the case, then his tickets would have been for the musical West Side Story, which of course was adapted from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, and Ernest Lehman would win the Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay 2 years later for the West Side Story movie, which of course swept the Academy Awards in 1961, winning about 10 of them. Yeah, the Winter Garden Theater in New York, he says. Adam Williams' expression doesn't really change throughout this movie. And here, Ernest Lehman, of course, predicts pretty much where Roger Thornhill is going to go over the course of the story. We start out in New York, and then we're eventually going to go to the Ambassador East in Chicago, as well as the Sheraton Johnson Hotel in Rapid City, South Dakota. Although we never really go to the Sheraton Johnson, but we do go to the East Ambassador Hotel in Chicago. And now most people are well aware that Rapid City, South Dakota is, of course, where Mount Rushmore is. And, of course, the advertising, I think, was very prominent in showcasing that we were going to go to Mount Rushmore eventually. It's the setting of the climax and everything. They provide you with such good ones. Martin Landau and James Mason were very, very well matched in this movie together. And the other two guys, the thugs that I mentioned before, you know, one of them is going to disappear after the first act. His character presumably dies in the middle of the movie. I'll point that out when we get to it. But the other one, Adam Williams, will return for the auction scene later. There's Robert Ellenstein and Adam Williams. And of course, Robert Ellenstein has the smile. Adam Williams has the serious expression. So Martin Landau is about to shove a bunch of bourbon into Roger Thornhill right here to get him drunk. And obviously they're going to basically set him up to die in an accident. Now, by the way, I just real quick, I want to welcome those in the chat right here, Sheeby Jeebies. Drop a like on the stream and share it everywhere. Thank you so much. Sheeby Jeebies and I, we do a lot of episodes for her Visited by Voices Network episodes, as well as, of course, Region Free. And Rob Gasper, welcome back, Stone. Wanted to catch you live, but a family dinner is getting in the way. We'll catch this later. So glad to see you back in the saddle. I am very happy to be back in the saddle doing this amazing movie. Now, in this scene right here, Cary is actually singing "I've Grown Accustomed to My Bourbon." Now, this is basically a joke because he knows the song "I've Grown Accustomed to Her Face," which was sung by Rex Harrison in the movie musical My Fair Lady, based on Pygmalion by George Bernard Shaw. And that movie, I mean, very near the end, Rex Harrison goes home singing "I've Grown Accustomed to Her Face" and finds Audrey Hepburn waiting for him when he arrives back. Um, so that so there's connections to two movie musicals already: West Side Story and My Fair Lady. Cary Grant does a pretty good, damn good job playing drunk right here as he drives along the highway. Luckily, I've never driven drunk before, although I have driven hungover one time, and that was a mistake because what you're about to see here when it looks like the road is about to split in two, that actually happened to me at one point. So I think they pretty much nailed this entire sequence in terms of what it would truly be like to be driving drunk on the highway. You know, nearly crashing all the cars. Cary Grant's really, really selling this. One of our great American actors, you know, he did screwball comedies in the 30s, like Bringing Up Baby, and war films like The Eagle and the Hawk, which I have on Blu-ray. The Philadelphia Story, of course. And of course, Bernard Herrmann's score gives the sequence the appropriate energy and suspense and everything as the thugs, Van Damme's thugs, are chasing him. And now we have a police car following him. And I've always loved this little bit right here that Cary Grant does where, you know, he thinks he hears a noise. He doesn't know quite what it is, but he's like, oh, no, that's probably nothing. Yeah, I'll just keep on driving. Now, I mean, it's hard to say whether he knows he's being followed by the two thugs earlier, but you know, ultimately it doesn't matter because he. And here's a triple accident, and the thugs realize they didn't quite kill the guy, so they're going to go back to Mr. Van Damme. Now, this movie influenced a lot of James Bond films. I'd like to think, even though we never see it, I'd like to think that Van Damme, you know, chastises him in some way. But of course, if Van Damme was an actual like James Bond villain, he would probably feed him to sharks or something. And this is an excellent scene showcasing Ernest Lehman's witty script, full of just the most wonderfully witty lines. Now, this gentleman right here in the role of Sergeant Klinger, he's actually a former baseball player and USC Trojan named John Berardino. And he would go on to become a soap opera icon, namely on General Hospital, playing Dr. Stephen Hardy. Now, I can't say for sure if this was the very first Hitchcock film I saw. I mean, I know I saw Rear Window at a very young age, and I know I saw The 39 Steps. My father had recorded many of Hitchcock's films illegally, of course, on VHS. So, you know, I got to see, you know, a good number of them, even some of the more obscure ones. You know, I saw The Lady Vanishes, The Man Who Knew Too Much. This was one where I just found myself continually going back to. I can't really explain that. I mean, yes, I did watch James Bond films, and you know, I'd watched many other thrillers from this era and everything. Um, this is the one role that I identify Cary Grant the most in, even though he was in, you know, so many other big films, classic films. You know, everything from, you know, The Eagle and the Hawk to Charade, which he would do after this with Audrey Hepburn. And one of my favorite lines right here, courtesy of Ernest Lehman, is when He says to his mother on the phone, yeah, they put a whole bottle of bourbon into me, but they didn't give me a chaser. Mm. Now, coming up in the courtroom scene, coming up is going to be an actor playing the attorney, which I got to give credit to Sheebie Jeebies because I showed this to her and her husband for the first time last night, and they both thoroughly enjoyed it. But I got to give her credit because she actually pointed out that Cary Grant's lawyer was played by an actor named Victor Larrabee. And Victor Larrabee is, of course, famous for being on Get Smart, the television series which was created by Mel Brooks and Buck Henry. And he played, if I got it right here, he played the chief of control on every episode of Get Smart except one. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, not Victor Larrabee, Edward Platt. Yeah, that's his name, Edward Platt. Played the head of control. And here he is right here. Yeah. An operatically trained bass baritone with a powerful voice, he debuted on Broadway in the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical Allegro. Jose Ferrer, who performed with Platt in the Broadway play The Shrike, helped him land his first film role in the 1955 film version of Allegro. Also in 1955, Platt appeared in Rebel Without a Cause. In 1957, he had a supporting role in Designing Women with Gregory Peck and Lauren Bacall. And he returned to Broadway in 1958 with the musical Oh, Captain in a romantic role. And the same year as North by Northwest, he also starred in a movie called The Rebel Set. He also appeared in episodes of Perry Mason, 77 Sunset Strip, Trackdown, State Trooper, Men into Space, Ripcord, Gunsmoke, Bonanza, One Step Beyond, The Rifleman, The Dick Van Dyke Show, The Twilight Zone, and Wagon Train. And he is, of course, widely known as the chief in the espionage parody series Get Smart. After Get Smart had ended, he had a recurring role in the situation comedy series The Governor and JJ in 1970, and he had guest roles in several other television series of the era, including Temperatures Rising, Bewitched, Owen Marshall, Counselor at Law, Love American Style, and The Odd Couple as Oscar Madison's boss in the episode Oscar's New Life. On March 19th, 1974, Platt was found dead in his Santa Monica apartment at the age of 58. Initial reports indicated the cause of death was a heart attack, but Platt's son later said that his father died from suicide after a long struggle with untreated depression. Mm-hmm. Now, Captain Junket, who you'll see right here behind Edward Platt, is played by an actor named Edward Binns. And he had a wide-spanning career in film and television, often portraying competent, hard-working, and purposeful characters in various roles. And aside from Northwest, he had some pretty big films. I mean, he was also in 12 Angry Men, Judgment at Nuremberg, Failsafe, The Americanization of Emily, Patton, and one of his last films was The Verdict, directed by Sidney Lumet and starring Paul Newman. And the actress playing Mrs. Townsend is an actress by the name of Josephine Hutchinson. Now, she actually was in real life at this time Mrs. Townsend because that was her husband's name. Yeah, from 1935 to his death in 1970, she was married to James F. Townsend. So they must have had a lot of fun on the set with that. Through her mother's connections, Hutchinson made her film debut at the age of 13 in Little Princess, starring Mary Pickford, and she later attended the Cornish School in Seattle, receiving her diploma in 1929. Under contract with Warner Brothers, she went to Hollywood in 1934, debuting that year in Happiness Ahead, opposite Dick Powell, and she was featured on the cover of Film Weekly in 1935 and appeared in The Story of Louis Pasteur, which of course garnered Paul Muni the Best Actor Oscar. And she again at Universal, she played the leading lady Elsa von Frankenstein in one of her memorable roles alongside actors Basil Rathbone, Boris Karloff, and Bela Lugosi in 1939's Son of Frankenstein. In 1957's Gun for a Coward, she was miscast as the mother of Fred MacMurray's character, although only 5 years MacMurray's senior. She later played the sister of the villainous Van Damme, Mrs. Townsend in North by Northwest, and Mrs. McAvoy in Love is Better Than Ever, starring Elizabeth Taylor. And after North by Northwest, she only did a few other films. She played the Widow Douglas in a 1960 version of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And she also played Mrs. Angstrom, Rabbit's mother, in Rabbit Run, based on the John Updike book. And I love how Hitchcock just pans the camera over, and here we have Adam Williams given the same deadly expression as we now cut to back to the Plaza Hotel in New York, where Roger Thornhill is now with his mother, played by Jessie Royce Landis, who was only about 4 or 5, I think she was like 6 years older than Cary Grant, but, just go with it. It's not something to get hung up on, really. But Josephine Hutchinson, she, let's see. Okay. Jessie Royce Landis, yeah. Sorry, just 1 second. Okay. So she received a scholarship at the age of 14, which enabled her to attend the Hinshaw Dramatic School, which led to her acting 2 years later with the Evanston Stock Company. Her Broadway career began with The Honor of the Family in 1926. In the era of old-time radio, Landis had the roles of Irene Emerson on Helpmate and the housekeeper on The House on Q Street. She also was part of a stellar cast of Broadway actors and actresses in the cast of We Are Always Young on WOR New York in 1941. In the 1950s, she began appearing in movies as a character actress, such as her roles in To Catch a Thief with Cary Grant, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, where she played Cary Grant's prospective mother-in-law. Let's see. And she was also in 1956 film The Swan, where she played the mother of characters played by Grace Kelly. Mm-hmm. Now, Grace Kelly was actually one of Hitchcock's choices to play the leading lady for North by Northwest, but she had already gone on to marry the Prince of Monaco, and she was essentially retired at that point. She had stopped making films in 1956 with High Society. But see, Landis listed she had excuse me. Let's see. Her autobiography, You Won't Be So Pretty, But You'll Know More, was published in 1954. And she died of cancer at the age of 75 on February 2nd, 1972. Now, the actress playing the hotel maid right here is an actress named Maudie Prickett, who was in nearly 300 stage roles before she passed in 1976 at the age of 61 due to uremic poisoning, which is a sudden decrease in kidney function. She was born in Portland, Oregon, often portrayed maids, aunts, secretaries, spinsters, busybodies, and nosy neighbors. Made 36 appearances on the television sitcom Hazel, starring Shirley Booth as the title character's friend. And she also played a cook named Elvira in Harvey, starring James Stewart. And a maid named Elsie in Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest. She also appeared in the 1950s Western series The Adventures of Kit Carson and 26 Men, and she played Miss Tazy, Lois Lane's old nurse, in a 1952 episode of The Adventures of Superman. Now, in the previous scene, right before they left the estate, Roger Thornhill's mother tells him jokingly, "Pay the $2." This is something I wanted to discuss real quick after he futilely attempts to shed light on his kidnapping and be exonerated from his DWI charge. The line is actually a reference to a Depression-era Willie Howard vaudeville sketch written by Billy K. Wells. A man is in court to pay a $2 fine for spitting on the subway, but his lawyer insists on fighting the case. As the lawyer incurs greater and greater sentences, his defendant keeps pleading, "Pay the $2." This sketch also appeared in Ziegfeld Follies with Edward Arnold playing the attorney. Although, to be honest, I think in the annals of cinema, when people think of $2, they think of the newspaper kid from Better Off Dead. $2. Now, okay. The voice operator that we're about to hear on the phone after he hangs up on one of the thugs is a voice actor by the name of Sarah Berner, and I wanted to cover her real quick here. Let's see. She had a lot of success in radio, where she began work on network radio in Hollywood with recurring roles on Fibber McGee and Molly and the George Burns and Gracie Allen Show. On the Jack Benny program, she voiced one-time parts before joining the principal cast as the recurring characters of Jack Benny's girlfriend, Gladys Zabisco, and wisecracking telephone operator Mabel Flapsaddle, who gossiped about Benny with her cohort Gertrude Gearshift, while Benny waited impatiently on the other end of the line for them to connect his call. Intended as a one-time appearance, they became recurring roles in the 45-46 season. Other radio work included waitress Dreamboat Mulvaney on Arthur's Place, Mrs. Horowitz on Life with Luigi, Helen Wilson on Amos and Andy, and an Italian housekeeper on the Jimmy Durante Show. She was cast alongside Rudy Valley on his show, The Fleischman's Yeast Hour. And then she was given her own series on NBC known as Sarah's Private Caper, in which she starred as a police department stenographer who moonlighted as an amateur sleuth to solve crimes. Billed as a satire on private detective stories that claimed to feature Berner's actual voice, the show premiered in June of 1950, but was canceled after just 11 weeks with its final broadcast on August 24th. It had been hampered by multiple title changes, but she really made her mark in animation. At MGM, she had done voices for Tex Avery shorts, Tom and Jerry shorts, as well as give voices in Warner Brothers cartoons like Daffy Duck and Hollywood, Bugs Bunny Gets the Boyd, Goldilocks and the Jiven Bears, Baby Bottleneck, and Andy Panda cartoons for Walter Lantz. And here, Cary Grant steals another cab, just like he did in the beginning. He has a way of just stealing cabs in this movie. So, following Thornhill's escape from Van Damme's henchmen at the Plaza Hotel, he takes a taxi to the United Nations headquarters to meet Lester Townsend. The UN headquarters buildings were also designed by the Harrison and Abramovitz, the architects of Thornhill's office. The scene of Cary Grant going to the United Nations in New York was filmed illicitly because, after reviewing the script, UN authorities denied permission to film on or near its property. After 2 failed attempts to get the required shots, Hitchcock had Grant pull up in a taxi cab right outside the General Assembly building right here, while a hidden camera crew filmed him exiting the vehicle and walking across the plaza. Now, it should be noted that Hitchcock wasn't really a fan of the New York police that were providing security for the film productions here. But and Roger Thornhill is actually going to assume the role of George Kaplan just so he can meet with Lester Townsend. Now, okay, now the man in the car, like I said, the one thug that's leaving, his name was, I got to double check here, Robert Ellenstein. That is pretty much the last time that we see Robert Ellenstein, although he is supposedly, even though we never really see him, but he is really the one flying the crop duster plane in Indiana much later in the film. And we'll get to that legendary sequence here in about an hour. But first, we have to meet the real Lester Townsend, not the one that James, not James Mason, but the actor playing the real Lester Townsend is a man by the name of Philip Ober. And he was known as Captain Dana Dynamite Holmes and From Here to Eternity. Reverend Planick, here he is right here, Reverend Planick and Elmer Gantry. And one of his last roles was actually in The Ghost and Mr. Chicken. But here's the thing. I recognized him as he played this very famous Hollywood producer named Dory Sherry in a hilarious episode of I Love Lucy called Don Juan is Shelved. And if you remember Lucy and Ricky Ricardo, they go to Hollywood because Ricky Ricardo has been offered a role as Don Juan in a movie. And Philip Ober right here, who plays Dory Sherry, lets him know that they are going to be shelving the picture after only a few weeks. And so, but he does promise to, and it's very funny because Lucy wants to convince him that Ricky Ricardo is so wanted that he just wouldn't be able to let him or the picture go. But he also appeared in a season 7 episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. And I should say that a lot of the uncredited members in this cast, including Philip Ober, did appear on Alfred Hitchcock Presents, both before and after this picture. And here we have the murder of Lester Townsend, just about right before he's about to address the General Assembly at the United Nations. And I love this high shot of Roger Thornhill running to the cab and getting away. And now we come to a sequence which I have to say, I kind of prefer that this was cut out of the picture, and I'll explain why. Now, there's always been complaints about Hitchcock movies being too long, that there's always, a sequence that, they could have gotten rid of to avoid, spoilers or surprises and whatnot. Vertigo was very famous for having the sequence where Kim Novak writes the letter to Jimmy Stewart saying that, explaining that it was actually the wife that died that got thrown from the tower, and that that she had actually assumed that role and everything. There were people that actually complained in 1958 at the time that wasn't really necessary. And yeah, you could look at it as well. I mean, Jimmy Stewart, the audience knows, but Jimmy Stewart doesn't know that Kim Novak wasn't actually Madeline. And in Psycho, everybody brings up, of course, the psychiatrist speech near the end, which Hitchcock famously referred to as a hat grabber. But here again, when you look at it from the perspective of a 1960 audience, that scene, I think, is actually absolutely necessary. I don't mind that scene, but that's for another conversation. This sequence right here with Leo G. Carroll as the professor, who was explaining that George Kaplan is not a real person. But of course, if he's not a real person, whose dandruff did that belong to in the room at the Plaza Hotel? But I just think, wouldn't it have been much better had we, along with Cary Grant, continued on this journey without knowing that George Kaplan is a fake CIA agent? That, I mean, we actually still assume that he's a real person. I think, I mean, and considering how long this movie is, and look, I've seen North by Northwest, hundreds of times. I'm going to see it hundreds of more times. I love every minute of it. This is the one scene where if I were the editor, George Tomasini, I would have taken it out just to have Leo G. Carroll tell Cary Grant later that George Kaplan doesn't exist. But that's just me. I mean, Hitchcock had final cut on the picture, and they only cut about like 5 seconds. Everything we see in North by Northwest, I mean, there was no deleted footage. I mean, there was nothing left on the cutting room floor. This is the one sequence I would have taken out, just so we could have that surprise much later that George Kaplan doesn't indeed exist. Now, see. Now, this train, the Grand Central train station right here in New York City. Now, among the onlookers on this particular day when this sequence was being shot would be 2 future directors, including George A. Romero and Larry Cohen. Now, of course, George A. Romero is known for his zombie pictures. And I wanted to double check right here. I think he was like a gopher, or he was either a gopher or he was just on the sidelines watching this scene being shot. But yeah, he was only 19 years old at the time. George A. Romero was off screen. And then, of course, Larry Cohen is famous for his for writing a bunch of blaxploitation movies, and he became known as an author of horror and science fiction films, including It's Alive and its sequels, The Stuff, and A Return to Salem's Lot. So they were both here at Grand Central Station as this entire sequence was being shot. Now, the ticket seller right here is played by an actor named Ned Glass, Polish-American actor. He most famously played Doc in West Side Story, which even though West Side Story isn't mentioned, I mean, here again, assuming when this movie came out, Roger Thornhill going to the Winter Garden Theater, he would have saw West Side Story. And as I mentioned earlier, Ernest Lehman also wrote West Side Story. But Ned Glass, he was also in Charade, also with Cary Grant, as Gideon. Short and bald with a slight hunch to his shoulders, he was immediately recognizable by his distinct appearance, nasal voice, and pronounced New York City accent. He worked in vaudeville, appeared on Broadway, continued to act and direct on Broadway till 1936 when he was signed as a MGM contract player. He made his first film appearance in 1937 with an uncredited role in True Confession, and his first credited film appearance came in 2 episodes of the serial Dick Tracy Returns. He worked regularly in films, helped by friends such as producer John Houseman, frequent member of the Columbia Pictures Short Subjects Department roster, and a favorite of directors Jules White and Del Lord. And he was also featured in a number of Three Stooges shorts, including Nutty But Nice in 1940, and co-starred with Buster Keaton in the 1939 short Mooching Through Georgia. But we are now at close to the 45-minute mark, and marking the entrance of Eva Marie Saint, who, like I said, we are on the eve of her 100th birthday, which is tomorrow. She was born on July 4th, 1924. But But we'll definitely talk more about Eva Marie Saint a bit later. But I just want to finish real quick that Glass also appeared in many other Three Stooges shorts, and he was reportedly briefly blacklisted, during which time he found work as a carpenter. Highlights of Glass's film career include playing Doc in West Side Story, Popcorn, and Blake Edwards' thriller Experiment in Terror. And other film appearances include the Elvis Presley film Kid Galahad, Who's Got the Action, Papa's Delicate Condition, Blindfold, A Big Hand for the Little Lady, The Fortune Cookie, Blackbeard's Ghost, Never a Dull Moment, The Love Bug, Lady Sings the Blues, Save the Tiger, and the TV movie Goldie and the Boxer. His final film appearance was in the low-budget comedy Street Music, and he died in 1984 at the age of 78. Hey, Cliff, how you doing? Awesome choice for a commentary. Sorry I didn't get the notification you were live until tomorrow. That is just fine, sir. We are at the 46-minute mark. Yeah, you can just jump to 46 minutes. Roger O. Thornhill is just about to leave the toilet. And I wanted to talk about the 20th Century Limited, which is the train that Roger is traveling on. Now, a lot of these were actually sets at MGM Studios. But the 20th Century Limited was an express passenger train on the New York Central Railroad from 1902 to 1967. The train traveled between Grand Central in New York to LaSalle Street Station in Chicago, Illinois, along the railroad's Walter Level route. NYC inaugurated the 20th Century Limited as competition to the Pennsylvania Railroad, aimed at upper class and business travelers. It made few station stops along the way and used track plans to take water at speed. On June 15, 1938, streamlined train sets designed by Henry Dreyfuss were added to the route. Widely considered to be one of the greatest American passenger trains of all time, the 20th Century Limited was the flagship train of the New York Central and was advertised as the most famous train in the world. It was described in the New York Times as having, quote, known to railroad buffs for 65 years as the world's greatest train, and its style was described as spectacularly understated. The phrase red carpet treatment is derived from passengers walking to the train on a specially designed crimson carpet. Excuse me real quick. Now, Eva Marie Saint's agent had told her that she had received an invitation to a dinner with Alfred Hitchcock and his family, the first time she and Hitchcock had met. Days after the dinner, Saint's mother called her and reminded her that Hitchcock loved casting women wearing beige clothing and white gloves. Following her mother's advice, she met Hitchcock again wearing white gloves and beige clothing. She credited this for helping her successfully win the role. Now, MGM actually wanted Sid Charisse, who was an actress that I remember from like Esther Williams vehicles in the 1940s, these aqua musicals that were put out by MGM. But Hitchcock insisted to MGM that Eva Marie Saint was the right choice for this role. And his insistence on casting Saint came as a surprise to some, as she was known as a method actress, often cast as dowdy or put upon housewives or girlfriends. Hitchcock joked with her that, quote, "You don't cry in this one. There's no sink," unquote. And, she only appeared in 21 movies. It's actually kind of surprising. I mean, she's primarily known for On the Waterfront, which, of course, won her the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. And here again, she has some great scenes with Marlon Brando in that movie. But this scene right here is, of course, not just a chance for Cary Grant and Eva Marie Saint to charge their chemistry with one another. But of course, Ernest Lehman's writing really, really shines through with a series of double entendres. Now, at one point, she actually does say here, I never discuss love on an empty stomach. But if you look at her lips very carefully, you can see that she was dubbed And the original line was, "I never make love on an empty stomach." So there's some wonderful flirtation here. Now, this is something that I really need to discuss and challenge almost. That, okay, now his initials there are ROT, Roger O. Thornhill, and of course, she asks him, "What does the O stand for?" And he says, "Nothing." And this is supposedly a reference to David O. Selznick, whose O supposedly signified nothing. Well, here again, I don't know exactly what the source of that is. I mean, and there's a great little bit there where she blows out the match, which, but anyway, yeah. So yeah, the O essentially stands for nothing in David O. Selznick, which is where this is drawn upon. However, according to the book Olive Thomas, The Life and Death of a Silent Film Beauty by Michelle Vogel, the O probably stood for Olive Thomas. Now, Olive Thomas, she's sadly, she's more well known as being married to Jack Pickford, who was the brother of Mary Pickford, who I actually mentioned earlier. And she had only done about, not even 20 films. I mean, she did about as many films as Eva Marie Saint for the Selznick Studios in the 1910s. And David Selznick reportedly had a massive crush on her, although she was, she had many lovers, obviously, at the time. And one of them was, of course, David's older brother, Myron Selznick. Now, David Selznick, of course, is, legendary for producing Gone with the Wind, which, nearly wrecked his health and career. But, yeah, I'd like to think, I mean, here again, I mean, anybody that wants to challenge me on this, please feel free to. But I do believe that the O in Roger O. Thornhill, if it does, in fact, mean the O in David O. Selznick, then that O is actually standing for Olive Thomas. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And Olive Thomas, just real quick, very, very sadly, I mean, she was a Ziegfeld showgirl who sadly died in 1920 in Paris at the age of 25. And we don't know if it was a murder. We don't know if it was suicide or if it was an accident, because she had ingested mercury bichloride, which had been prescribed to Jack Pickford for his syphilis. Now, and here again, it's one of the great mysteries. I mean, it's the first Hollywood scandal. It's the very first Hollywood scandal. We will never know what happened to Olive Thomas. But at any rate, so going back to North by Northwest here, let's see. Now, the detective, the state police detective right here, is an actor named Toll Avery. He had appeared on television series like Maverick, starring James Garner, and he was also cast twice during this time in another ABC WB Western series called Colt 45, starring Wade Preston. He played the role of Archer Belgrade in Circle of Fear in 1958 and Barnes in Queen of Dixie in 1959. In the latter episode, he was cast with Andy Clyde in the role of Captain Gibbs. In 1960, he was cast as Theodore and John Nichols, respectively, in the episodes Key to the City and False Identity on Bourbon Street Beat, starring Andrew Dugan, Richard Long, and Van Williams. And he also had guest starred on the CBS sitcom Pete and Gladys with Harry Morgan and Kara Williams, and also was one of several appearances in different roles on The Andy Griffith Show. Avery in 1964 played Ben Weaver, and that same year he was cast as Speaker Burt Metcalf on the CBS drama series Slattery's People. He appeared 5 times during the 1960s on the long-running NBC Western series The Virginian. He also appeared on Gomer Pyle USMC, appeared 3 times on Death Valley Days as Frank Brenner, and also as Walter Benson in Doc Holliday's Good Gold Bars, and as Judge Sidney Edgerton, who later became the first governor of the Montana Territory in the segment Lucia Darling and the Ostrich. And finally, he appeared 3 times on ABC's Batman television series from the 1960s and CBS's Mannix, once on ABC's Rango in 1967 and Dragnet in 68. He received a real estate license at about the same time he won his role in Slattery's People. He continued his sales job working in real estate on weekends, and he died of a heart attack a day before his 58th birthday on August 27th, 1973. And some of the other films he made were Twist Around the Clock, A Tiger Walks, WUSA, and his last film role was in Willie Dynamite, where he played a Business International Association television speaker. And here we have a very sensual scene on the train with Cary Grant and Eva Marie Saint. Now, trust me, I'm going to be talking more about Eva Marie Saint a little bit later, but I want to get you prepared because we are about to meet a train porter that she stole the, what was it? A corkscrew, I guess, to open him up in the compartment there. This was actually kind of inspired the train sequence near the end of Live and Let Die, in which Jane Seymour gets caught up in that. But I mean, this movie inspired so much when it came to James Bond. I mean, Cary Grant was actually offered the role of James Bond. James Mason was considered to play James Bond. I mean, and of course, there's one thing I wanted to mention much later, where Martin Landau uses the term "old Gestapo trick," which will later be utilized for something in The Living Daylights, one of my favorite James Bond films from 1987 with Timothy Dalton. But the train porter is played by Ernest Anderson, born in Lynn, Massachusetts, earned his high school diploma in Washington, D.C., formerly named the Preparatory High School for Colored Youth. Founded in 1891, it was America's first public high school for Black students. He earned his bachelor's degree at Northwestern University's School of Drama and Speech, moved to Hollywood, and was working in the service department when Bette Davis arranged for him to interview for the role of Perry Clay in the film In This Our Life in 1942. Mr. Anderson persuaded the director, John Huston, to change the racist dialogue of his character, typical of Hollywood in that era, to one of dignified intelligence and emotion. After serving his country in the United States Army during World War II, he returned to Warner Brothers. Here he is right here. This is Ernest Anderson. He returned to Warner Brothers, where he continued to humanize the roles of America's Black performers. He remained active in film until the late 1960s, and he died in DeLand, Florida on March 5th, 2011. And here we have this very, very tiny razor, which is going to become very useful for Roger later as he gets to the Chicago train station. Over dinner one night, Sir Alfred Hitchcock related to Ernest Lehman his giddy enthusiasm for what this movie was really about. He said, "Ernie, do you realize what we're doing in this picture? The audience is like a giant organ that you and I are playing. At one moment, we play this note on them and get this reaction. And then we play that chord and they react that way. And someday we won't even have to make a movie. There'll be electrodes implanted in their brains. And we'll just press different buttons and they'll go ooh and ah. And we'll frighten them and make them laugh. Won't that be wonderful?" Unquote. Now, like I said, MGM originally wanted Gregory Peck to play Hitchcock, wanted Gregory Peck to play Roger Thornhill, but Hitchcock thought he was too stone-faced. MGM tried to persuade Hitchcock to use their Ultra Panavision system, which utilized a 65mm negative with a slight anamorphic squeeze. When projected, the image would be free of grain and quite wide. Hitchcock reportedly balked at using this large format and instead insisting on going with VistaVision. which was the format used in several of his Paramount Pictures productions, including, of course, Vertigo. Going with Ultra Panavision would have meant Bernard Herrmann's score would have been heard in magnetic stereo. The VistaVision prints utilized optical mono sound. Ironic that the version shown now has an entirely new soundtrack mixed in stereo. According to the book Haunted Idol, the story of the real Cary Grant by Jeffrey Wansel, Cary Grant wanted Sophia Loren to play the part of Eve Kendall, but she turned the role down. Sophia Loren played a role very similar to Eve Kendall in Stanley Donin's Alfred Hitchcock-inspired thriller Arabesque in 1966, opposite Gregory Peck, MGM's original choice for the role of Roger Thornhill. Now, in the dialogue here, as they're going up to the train station in Chicago when he's in the red cap uniform, he asks her, where do you suggest I change my clothes? In Marshall Field's window? Well, Marshall Field and Company was a very famous Chicago-based department store that first opened in 1852. The chain was taken over by Macy's in 2006, but the flagship Chicago Loop store on State Street remains, along with its famous clocks. And I might as well throw this out here as well. I found this very interesting. In 2014, a brand new fly species was named after the fictional spy of George Kaplan. Belonging to the genus Prochyliza, Prochyliza, it is known as the Prochyla George Kaplani. The type specimens of the species, which had been found in Spain a few years before, had been wrongly identified as belonging to Prochyliza nigricornis, a species described in Europe in the 19th century, and was discovered to be a non-valid species name under the taxonomical rules. The description of the new species was published in the scientific journal Zootaxa. Now, of course, one of the goofs in this movie is that, considering how big Cary Grant is and the guy that he bought the uniform from there, you see all that money. I think that guy's a little too small. Cary Grant was actually 55 years old, although I do agree with Mr. Sheebie-Jeebies that he does look about a decade younger. You can see some gray in his hair. It was actually Jimmy Stewart while Hitchcock was shooting Vertigo that he was first talking about shooting North by Northwest. Just 1 second here. Okay. Giving credit to Dhruv Sharma of Screen Rant, last year on July 23rd, 2023, he published this. According to the book, A Companion to Alfred Hitchcock, journalist Otis L. Guernsey pitched the core idea for North by Northwest to Alfred Hitchcock in 1951. Although the auteur did not instantly use the idea, he kept it in his head until he needed it while writing a new script with screenwriter Ernest Lehman. Later in a 1957 letter, Guernsey even reminded the director of the same idea, which according to several accounts was inspired by the true story of a World War II incident where British operatives had invented the name of a fictitious spy in the Middle East. In an interview via Classic American Films by William Baer, screenwriter Ernest Lehman also opened up about the origins of the movie's non-existent spy idea and its real-life inspirations. According to Lehman's account, when he and Hitchcock were playing around with ideas, Hitchcock recalled how journalist Guernsey had approached him at a cocktail party and told him about how the CIA had once used a non-existent decoy. As Lehman revealed, Guernsey was only curious if Hitchcock would be interested in using the idea in one of his movies. And I also wanted to point out just real quick here. Let's see. While filming Vertigo, Sir Alfred Hitchcock described some of the plot of this project to frequent Hitchcock leading man and Vertigo star James Stewart, who naturally assumed that Hitchcock meant to cast him as Roger Thornhill and was eager to play it. Actually, Hitchcock wanted Cary Grant to play the role. By the time Hitchcock realized the misunderstanding, Stewart was so anxious to play Thornhill that rejecting him would have caused a great deal of disappointment. So Hitchcock delayed production on the movie until Stewart was already safely committed to filming Anatomy of a Murder for director Otto Preminger, before officially offering him the role in the movie. Stewart had no choice but to turn down the offer. Remember, a lot of actors back then were under contracts to studios. So it allowed Hitchcock to cast Cary Grant, the actor that he had always wanted. And now we come upon one of the most famous sequences in all of cinema, where Cary Grant as Roger Thornhill is going out to the middle of nowhere it's supposed to be somewhere in Indiana, I guess, but to meet George Kaplan. And as you can see with this great shot, just this wide open plain. And we can only assume that it's also very, very hot there as he gets off the bus and looks around and sees pretty much nothing but fields and crops. Just the complete stillness of it all, the quietness of it all. I mean, and I like how, even though Bernard Herrmann's score is just absolutely wonderful throughout the movie, it slowly melts away as we begin to realize that Roger Thornhill is indeed in no man's land right here. Yeah, I mean, it's so quiet. Although we do see a crop dusting plane way off in the distance. And we will see it again, of course, very, very soon. But we can barely see it in the distance. I can only assume that people that saw this in the theater at the time, I'm sure some of them noticed the crop dusting plane, but would have no idea that it would be coming after Roger Thornhill here in a minute. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the thugs in the very beginning, played by Robert Ellenstein, who plays Licht, he pretty much disappears when Adam Williams, who plays Valerian, his fellow thug, basically leaves him in the car and he drives away from the United Nations. Well, Licht is supposedly flying this crop dusting plane. And soon we are going to see, we've already had 2 cars pass by, and now we're going to have a truck, which is going to cover Cary Grant in dust and dirt right here. And we're going to see a man come up in a car. And I like how it comes out from behind the fields right there, and it's going to coming up here. And this guy, who is uncredited, is just known in the IMDb cast as the Man at the Crossroads. This actor's name is actually Malcolm Atterbury. Yeah, here he is right here, Malcolm Atterbury, native of Philadelphia. And he graduated from the Hill School in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. In the mid-1930s, Atterbury decided to pursue a career in drama. He enrolled at Hilda Spong's dramatic school using an assumed name. Later, after revealing his true identity, he went to, quote, finance a summer theater for the Hilda Spong players at Cape May, and they in turn asked him to be their managing director. In 1928, Atterbury was the bass singer in a quartet that sang on WLIT in Philadelphia. And in 1930, he became the program director of a radio station in Philadelphia. He went on to become a business manager of What, which is a commercial AM radio station owned by VM Broadcasting. Atterbury was a devoted theater actor, owned and operated 2 theaters in the Adirondack Mountains of New York, and the Tamarack Playhouse in Lake Pleasant, New York, and the Albany Playhouse Company in Albany. He also appeared on Broadway in the original cast of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest as Scanlon. He is perhaps best known for this uncredited role as the rural man who exclaims, quote, "That plane's dusting crops where there ain't no crops." 4 years later, Atterbury appeared as the deputy in Hitchcock's The Birds. He further appeared in such films as I Was a Teenage Werewolf, Crime of Passion, Blue Denim, Wild River, Advise and Consent, and Hawaii. His last film was Emperor of the North Pole in 1973. He was cast in 5 episodes of the CBS murder mystery series Perry Mason during the late 50s and early 60s, played Sam Burris in the 57 episode The Case of the Angry Mourner. And he was also on Gunsmoke, The Twilight Zone, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, The Asphalt Jungle, Have Gun Will Travel, The Rookies, Bonanza, The Fugitive, State Trooper, The Man from Black Hawk, The Tall Man, The Invaders, and The Andy Griffith Show. And finally, he had a regular role as Grandfather Aldrin in the 1974-75 television family drama Apple's Way. And right here, the crop dusting plane starts going right to Cary Grant. Now, some of these shots were actually filmed on a stage at MGM. But, I mean, honestly, they're so realistic, I never really noticed. I mean, you know, in the many, many times I have seen this film. But, this one bit right here where Cary Grant is about to jump, right there, that's on a stage. Although, I mean, to be honest, it's so good you would never have noticed it. The stage bits blend in so well with the regular scenes out in the middle of nowhere. Grant said he would have played Bond if he would agree to let him play it just once, but they wanted a multiple picture deal. But Grant felt that he was too old to play the part more than once. I didn't read that, but I appreciate that, Cliff. Thank you so much. Yeah, I believe that. It's like, yeah, I could probably do Bond as a one-time thing. But, you know, what's funny is that, of course, a lot of people, when they think of James Bond, they think that of his very first film, Dr. No. As a matter of fact, Bond first appeared in an episode of Climax in 1954 as a live television show. And it starred Barry Nelson as Jimmy Bond. Now, Barry Nelson would, of course, later be in The Shining. He started out in the 40s, like in movies like Johnny Eager. But yeah, he's best known as Stuart Ullman, who owns the hotel in The Shining. But yeah, in the episode of Climax of Casino Royale, Nelson's Bond is played as an American spy working for the quote-unquote Combined Intelligence Agency. Most of the largely forgotten show was uncovered by film historian Jim Schoenberger in 1981, with the ending including credits found later. Both copies are black and white kinescopes, but the original live broadcast was in color. The rights to the program were acquired by MGM at the same time as the rights for the 1967 film version, clearing the legal pathway and enabling it to make the 2006 film of the same name. And of course, Cary Grant has had enough of this crop dusting plane, and he begs this truck to stop. Now, when Grant gets knocked over. This is actually a stuntman for a very brief moment, right there, a very brief moment. Now, it's completely believable the plane would actually fly into the truck because they didn't think the truck was going to stop. Magnum Oil was actually the company that Patricia Hitchcock's husband worked for at this time. Patricia Hitchcock was, of course, Alfred Hitchcock's daughter, who the next year would appear in Psycho as Janet Leigh's fellow secretary. Now, this shot right here is supposedly a tableau. I forget the gentleman's name. Unfortunately, the gentleman's name escaped off the top of my head, but supposedly that shot is based on a tableau from an artist, a painter from the early 20th century. Unfortunately, I just can't remember the name right now. But now, instead of stealing a cab, Cary Grant actually steals a truck with a refrigerator on it. So hopefully that poor guy got a ride with that couple. I mean, we'll never know, to be perfectly honest. And here we are at the Ambassador East Hotel in Chicago. Yes. Okay. Bring up something here real quick. Forgive me, I'm going to have to take like a break for like 30 seconds to admit it after talking for a good hour and 15 minutes here. But we are coming up on the 1 hour and 17 minute mark, 1 hour and 17 minutes into North by Northwest. And we have approximately 1 more hour to go. Like I said, this was Alfred Hitchcock's longest movie at 137 minutes. And I think it should have been cut down to more like 130. I mean, it could have been tightened up with just a little bit, with all due respect to the editor George Tomasini, who of course did Psycho after this, and I believe he did Vertigo too. Now this dress on Eva Marie Saint, such a gorgeous dress right there, where we get to see her back and everything. And I like this little clever way. This is the second time that he has to figure out some kind of ruse to get a hotel number and everything. And so, oh yeah, she's in room 4 something or other. Now, the original title, or rather the working title for North by Northwest, was actually The Man in Lincoln's Nose, which, of course, in retrospect is a rather silly title, being that, Lincoln being part of Mount Rushmore. But the funny thing is that Cary Grant and Eva Marie Saint don't go anywhere near Lincoln. I mean, they're going down Mount Rushmore in between Washington and Jefferson, but they don't even go close to Lincoln. Hitchcock often told journalists of an idea he had about Cary Grant hiding from villains inside Abraham Lincoln's nose and being given away when he sneezes. He speculated that the film could be called The Man in Lincoln's Nose, or even The Man Who Sneezed in Lincoln's Nose. Hitchcock sat on the idea, waiting for the right screenwriter to develop it. The original traveling salesman character had been suited to James Stewart, but Lehman changed it to a Madison Avenue advertising executive, a position that he himself had formerly had. John Russell Taylor's 1978 biography, Hitch, The Life and Times of Alfred Hitchcock, suggests that the story originated after a spell of writer's block during the scripting of another film project. Hitchcock had agreed to do a film for MGM, and they had chosen an adaptation of the novel The Wreck of the Mary Dear by Hammond Innes. Composer Bernard Herrmann had recommended that Hitchcock work with his friend Ernest Lehman. After a couple weeks, Lehman offered to quit, saying he didn't know what to do with the story. Hitchcock told him they got along great together and they would just write something else. Lehman said that he wanted to make the ultimate Hitchcock film. Hitchcock thought for a moment, then said he had always wanted to do a chase across Mount Rushmore. Lehman and Hitchcock spitballed more ideas: a murder at the United Nations headquarters, a murder at a car plant in Detroit, a final showdown in Alaska. Eventually, they settled on the UN murder for the opening and the chase across Mount Rushmore for the climax. For the central idea, Hitchcock remembered something an American journalist had told him about spies creating a fake agent as a decoy. Perhaps their hero could be mistaken for the fictitious agent and end up on the run. They bought the idea from the journalist for $10,000. And I forgot to mention about the plane in the crop dusting sequence. The aircraft flying in the aerial chase scene is a Naval Aircraft Factory N3N Canary, better known as the Yellow Peril, a World War II Navy primary trainer, sometimes converted for crop dusting. The aircraft that hits the truck and explodes is a wartime Boeing Stearman Model 75 trainer, and many of these were also used for agricultural purposes until the 1970s. The plane was piloted by Bob Coe, a crop duster from Wasco, California. Hitchcock replaced replicas of square Indiana highway signs, and in 2000, The Guardian ranked the crop duster scene as number 29 on their list of the top 100 film moments. And the British film magazine Empire ranked it as the greatest movie moment of all time in its August 2009 release. Now, the purse, for the life of me, I'm trying to remember what the name of the store is. Bergman, the label was inside the purse. Hitchcock had a fetish for women's handbags, apparently, but he was also very unsatisfied with the wardrobe that MGM had provided Eva Marie Saint. So he actually took her out to that store that's on the label in the handbag in New York so that she could just buy all her own clothes for the movie. Now, like I said, Eva Marie Saint had appeared in only 21 films, although, considering the fact that she is about to turn 100 years old here, it's not too late for her to do a 22nd film, to be perfectly honest. Born in New Jersey and raised in New York, Saint attended Bowling Green State University and began her career as a television and radio actress in the late 1940s. Among her notable early credits, she originated the role of Thelma in Horton Foote's The Trip to Bountiful, originally an NBC telecast, before being adapted into the Tony Award-winning play of the same name. For her performance in the stage version, she won an Outer Critics Circle Award. And she made her film debut in Elia Kazan's On the Waterfront, opposite Marlon Brando. Not only did she win the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress, but she also got a nomination for Most Promising Newcomer at the BAFTA Awards, establishing her as an immediate star. It is widely considered to be one of the greatest and most influential films ever made. From then on, Saint appeared in 20 other roles. All right. Now, let's see, what was this? She appeared in a 1947 Life magazine special about television, and also in a 1949 feature Life article about her as a struggling actress earning minimum amounts from early TV while trying to make ends meet in New York City. In a 2000 interview in Premiere Magazine, Saint recalled making On the Waterfront, which has been highly influential, saying, Elia Kazan put me in a room with Marlon Brando. He said, Brando is the boyfriend of your sister. You're not used to being with a young man. Don't let him in the door under any circumstances. I don't know what he told Marlon. You'll have to ask him. Good luck. Brando came in and started teasing me. He put me off balance, and I remained off balance for the whole shoot. She repeated the anecdote in a 2010 interview. Now, the other films that she appeared in, I've only seen a handful of them, to be perfectly honest. I wanted to watch more before this commentary, and unfortunately, I just didn't get around to them. But after On the Waterfront, she appeared in the 1956 film That Certain Feeling, starring Bob Hope, and directed by Norman Panama and Melvin Frank. And then in 1957, she did a movie with Don Murray and Anthony Franciosa called A Hatful of Rain, about a young married man with a secret morphine addiction, based on the 1955 Broadway play of the same name. It is medically and sociologically accurate account of the effects of morphine on an addict and his family. The frank depiction of drug addiction in a feature film was a rarity for its time. Of course, we also had the Man with the Golden Arm with Frank Sinatra, which was also about drug addiction. And see, one of the writers of that film, Foreman, was blacklisted at the time of release. The Writers Guild of America added his name to the film credits in 1998, 14 years after his death. It was directed by Fred Zinnemann and features a strong musical score by, of course, Bernard Herrmann. And Herrmann was asked by 20th Century Fox to rescore his prelude for the film, as the original was considered, quote, too terrifying. Mm-hmm. So A Hatful of Rain is one I definitely recommend. And then she was also in Raintree County, which was also a huge, huge film for MGM that it made money. I mean, it was kind of touted as a 1950s version of Gone with the Wind, I think. But set in the American South against the backdrop of the antebellum and the American Civil War, the film tells the story of a small-town Midwestern teacher and poet named John Shaughnessy, who meets and marries a beautiful Southern belle named Susanna Drake. However, her emotional instability leads to the destruction of their marriage. The leading roles are played by Montgomery Clift, Elizabeth Taylor, Eva Marie Saint, Nigel Patrick, and Lee Marvin. And the film was given a wide release in December of 1957, where it got negative reviews from the film critics, but praised the production values and the performances of Clift and Taylor, but they were critical of the film's plot. It was nominated for 4 Oscars. Now, North by Northwest, as a matter of fact, was nominated for 3 Academy Awards. It was nominated for Ernest Lehman's screenplay, as well as the art direction and set direction by William A. Horning, Robert F. Boyle, Merrill Pyle, Henry Grace, and Frank R. McKelvey. And it was also nominated for film editing, George Tomasini's editing. Mm-hmm. Now, okay. We might as well go ahead and reveal at this moment that in numerous interviews, Martin Landau said that he made a decision on his own to play the character of Leonard as gay and, in fact, in love with Philip Van Damme. In an October 2012 interview with Devin Faraci, Landau said that he was cast in this movie when Sir Alfred Hitchcock, quote, saw me in a play called Middle of the Night, Paddy Chayefsky's first Broadway play with Edward G. Robinson, which I toured with after the Broadway run. Now, right here, as you will notice, Hitchcock cuts to Martin Landau when Philip Van Damme mentions jealousy. Now, of course, later on, Van Damme would accuse Martin Landau's character Leonard of being jealous. Now, as a kid, I obviously thought he was jealous of him being with Eva Marie Saint, but no, he was actually jealous of Eva Marie Saint being with Philip Van Damme. Look, it's very subtle. It's very subtle, and I think Martin Landau does it in such a wonderful way here. And one of the things that made the production code nervous was, in fact, Martin Landau's, as you can say, what's the term? Effeminate nature. Yes, excuse me. And there, of course, is Leo G. Carroll, who we'll talk about a little bit more later, returning as the professor. But Going on with what Martin Landau was saying, Hitchcock was there opening night. I played a very macho guy, 180 degrees different from Leonard, who I chose to play as a homosexual, but very subtly, because he wanted to get rid of Eva Marie Saint with such a vengeance. James Mason, to the day he died, he became a friend of mine. The most often asked question of James was whether Van Damme, his character, was bisexual. He said, quote, "No, he wasn't. But Landau made a choice, and there's nothing I can do about it," unquote. I actually caused him some grief. Everyone told me not to do that because it was my first big movie, and people would think I was gay. I'm an actor. I said it wasn't going to be my last movie, and it certainly wasn't. I've never played a character like that since. I also felt it was something people would know or not know. It was very subtle. I thought in Boise, Idaho, they might not notice. Landau also said that after he made the decision to play Leonard as gay, Hitchcock and screenwriter Ernest Lehman were very supportive of the idea. Quote, "Ernie Lehman added a line which was not in the script. Call it my woman's intuition was not in the script. It was a very daring line for the 1950s. Men just didn't say things like that. Hitchcock loved what I did and left me alone." In fact, there's an anecdote that Martin Landau gave where he noticed when Hitchcock was talking to many other actors, and he asked him about that. He was like, I mean, why do you keep talking to all the other actors but not me? And Hitchcock told him, well, if I need the actor to do something, if they're doing something wrong, I talk to them. But if I don't need anything from them, if they're just doing everything right, I don't say anything to him. So Martin Landau was like, "Oh, well, I guess I must be doing everything right then." And that's another one of the great lines in the script is, "One thing we know, you're no fake. You're a genuine idiot." Where he essentially pretends to be drunk here at the auction sequence. Now, I want to talk about the auctioneer and the assistant auctioneer to his left right there. The assistant auctioneer to the left is Olan Soli. There he is in the middle right there with the glasses on. Okay. Beginning in 1943, he played lead male characters on radio's famed The First Nighter program for 9 years. There he is giving orders to her to contact the police. Listeners of First Nighter who met Soul in person were often surprised, since his slight 135-pound frame did not seem to match the voices that he gave his characters. From 1941 on, Soule had the role of L. William Kelly, SS-11, the second in command of the secret squadron of the Captain Midnight radio adventure serial. Concluding his 9-year run on First Nighter, Soule moved to Hollywood, where he appeared in films and television shows, building a reputation as a reliable character actor. He said, quote, "Because of my build and glasses, I've mostly played lab technicians, newscasters, and railroad clerks." He played a telegraph operator in Wanted Dead or Alive on October 16, 1959, only several months after North by Northwest premiered in Chicago. He also appeared as Mr. Krull, a boarding house resident in The Day the Earth Stood Still, and in many television series like The Donald O'Connor Show, I Love Lucy, The Andy Griffith Show, and a semi-regular role as real-life LAPD criminalist Ray Pinker on the original TV and radio version of Dragnet, and as the slightly renamed but essentially identical LAPD criminalist Ray Murray on the 1967 revival version. And he has a slew of credits. I mean, everything from the Jack Benny program to the Addams Family to Dallas to Simon and Simon. And he's remembered for providing many voices of Batman in several animated series, such as the Batman Superman Hour, the new Scooby-Doo movies, Sesame Street Super Friends, All New Super Friends Hour, Challenge of the Super Friends, The World's Greatest Super Friends, and Super Friends in 1980. And he appeared as a newscaster on the live-action Batman TV series in the episode The Pharaohs in a Rut with his Super Friend successor, Adam West. And he died at the age of 84 of lung cancer in 1994. Now, the two cops right here. Officer Charlie here, sitting in the back seat with Cary Grant, is an actor by the name of Ken Lynch. He made his acting career on radio series. In 1940, on The Bishop and the Gargoyle, he played the Gargoyle, an ex-convict who helped the bishop solve crimes. And from 1942 to 1946, he was the voice of Tanker, the mechanic who aids the title character in Hop Harrigan. He had roles on 3 daytime radio soap operas, Backstage Wife, Portia Faces Life, and Slim Stark on A Woman of America. He starred in $1,000 Reward, a rare crime drama, where after the crime play had ended, the host would place a telephone call to a random listener who would then try to solve the mystery. Lynch also appeared on the radio shows The Falcon, 21st Precinct, and Gunsmoke. And he also starred in The Plainclothesman on the Dumont Television Network. And here again, he did so many other TV jobs. And even though he still had a very successful career as an actor by the 1970s, he began looking for another, more steady source of income. He explained in a 1975 newspaper interview, quote, "In acting, you can't just predict the jobs that will come along. If you could budget. With such income uncertainty in mind as he grew older, Lynch bought a flower shop in North Hollywood a few years before the noted interview. He began studying floriculture, taking courses in the art of floral arranging and design, and then providing flowers for local weddings, receptions, and other events. He died at the age of 79 from a virus in 1990. And the actor playing Sergeant Flam right here, who just told Cary Grant that he ought to be ashamed of himself for murdering someone at the UN, is played by an actor named Patrick McVeigh. Get him out of the way real quick before we talk about Leo G. Carroll here. Patrick McVeigh, he had experience on stage before his debut in 1941 when he made an uncredited appearance in 8 films, beginning with Caught in the Draft. More than a dozen uncredited film roles from 42 to 46, appeared in Gene Yarborough's thriller The Brute Man, and he seldom arose above supporting roles in films, but had more success on television. As a lifetime member of the Actors Studio, McVeigh made his small screen debut on September 5th, 1950, on an early series called Suspense. On the following week's episode, he had first starring role, and less than a month later, McVeigh began a 4-year role of 160 episodes as Steve Wilson, the crusading managing editor in Big Town, a melodrama set in a newspaper office in a large American city. He left the series in 1954. That same year, he appeared in 2 episodes of Kraft Television Theater, guest starred on Gail Storm's show, The Millionaire, Playhouse 90, Bourbon Street Beat, and in 4 westerns, The Restless Gun, Man Without a Gun, Sugarfoot, and Bat Masterson. From 1957 to 58, McVeigh co-starred in the syndicated series Boots and Saddles as Lieutenant Colonel Wesley Hayes. After the series ended in 1958, he was cast as the police reporter Ben Andrews in Manhunt, which was canceled in 1961, and he continued his career with guest roles on various TV shows, including General Electric Theater, Cheyenne, Tombstone Territory, The Rifleman, Have Gun Will Travel, The Virginian, Gunsmoke, and 3 appearances on Perry Mason, including the appearance of District Attorney Covington in the 1959 episode The Case of the Dubious Bridegroom. His last TV roles were in the CBS drama Nurses as the character John Harris in the soap opera Dark Shadows. And in 1968, he was cast in Frank Sinatra's The Detective. And in 1972, he played Dr. Hanson in 7 episodes of the soap opera The Doctors. And his last on-screen appearance in the 1973 film Bang the Drum Slowly. And he passed away in 1973 at the age of 63. Now, Leo G. Carroll right here, who plays the professor, he had a career of more than 40 years, and he appeared in 6 Hitchcock films. In addition to North by Northwest, he was also in Spellbound and Strangers on a Train. So Hitchcock obviously loved to cast Leo G. Carroll in more than one role. I mean, Cary Grant starred in 4 Hitchcock films, and Jimmy Stewart did 4 as well. But Leo G. Carroll did 6, so he's got him beat right there. During 1933 to 1934, Carroll had the role of the impeccable valet Trump in the Broadway play The Green Bay Tree. And in 1941, started with Vincent Price and Judith Evelyn and Patrick Hamilton's Angel Street, better known as Gaslight, which ran for 3 years at the Golden Theater on West 45th in New York City. Carroll, who had moved to Hollywood, made his film debut in the 1934 film Sadie McKee, approximately 25 years before North by Northwest. He often played doctors or butlers, but he made appearances as Marley's Ghost in the 1938 version of A Christmas Carol, as well as Joseph in the 1939 version of Wuthering Heights. That is my favorite version of Wuthering Heights, by the way, based on the Bronte novel. He appeared in 2 Charlie Chan films, City in Darkness as a shady French locksmith, followed by a role in Charlie Chan's Murder Cruise as a passenger on a ship. In the original version of Father of the Bride from 1950 with Spencer Tracy, he played an unctuous wedding caterer. In the 1951 film The Desert Fox, the story of Rommel, he played a sympathetic German field marshal, Gerd von Rundstedt, presenting him as a tragic, resigned figure completely disillusioned with Hitler. And he's perhaps best known for his 6 Hitchcock films, Rebecca, Suspicion, Spellbound, The Paradine Case, Strangers on a Train, and North by Northwest. He had a central role in the highly rated movie We're No Angels in 1955 with Humphrey Bogart, Peter Ustinov, and Basil Rathbone, in addition to appearing as Reverend Mosby with actress Haley Mills in The Parent Trap. Carroll is remembered for his role as the frustrated banker haunted by the ghosts of George and Marion Kirby in the television series Topper, which co-stars Anne Jeffries, Robert Sterling, and Lee Patrick. He appeared as the older Father Fitzgibbon from 62 to 63 in ABC's Going My Way, about 2 Roman Catholic priests at St. Dominic's Parish in New York City. He played John Miller in Channing on ABC, subsequently starred as Spy Master Alexander Waverly on The Man from U.N.C.L.E., which North by Northwest would influence as well. Several U.N.C.L.E. films were derived from the series, and a spin-off television series, The Girl from U.N.C.L.E. in 1966. He was one of the first actors to appear in 2 different television series as the same character. He also appeared in spots on the first 2 regular episodes of Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, the series that replaced The Man from U.N.C.L.E., and in fact appears as Mr. Waverly in the very first episode Party Scene, where he is seen using a pen communicator to call Kuryakin to report that he believes he has found the Rush headquarters. He died in Hollywood of cancer-induced pneumonia 9 days before his 86th birthday in 1972. Carroll was posthumously referenced in the lyrics of Science Fiction Double Feature, the opening song of the musical stage production of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and its 1975 film adaptation. The song refers to Carroll in connection with his role in the film Tarantula from 1955. Yeah, if I remember, it goes like, I know Leo G. Carroll was over a barrel when Tarantula took to the hills. Yeah, it's great right there. See, look at the look of disdain that that Leonard has for Eva Marie Saint all throughout this movie. He's like, man, I need to kill this bitch. But I was going to say also that in addition to North by Northwest, Leo G. Carroll's role in The Parent Trap with Haley Mills, where she plays twins separated at birth, they meet at summer camp, and he plays the reverend that comes over to marry David Keith with his fiance. But of course, right at that moment, Maureen O'Hara, his ex-wife, comes to visit and brings the twin sister when they both switch at summer camp. Leo G. Carroll's facial reactions, his lines in The Parent Trap, even though it's a small role, is so memorable. I think he should have been nominated for an Oscar, to be perfectly honest. I mean, when he catches Maureen O'Hara on top of Brian Keith on the couch, and like his fiance is waiting outside with all the other guests. He just comes in and he notices them on the on the couch together, and he just says, "Oh, excuse me," and then there's this bickering back and forth between the fiance and Brian Keith. He just keeps looking and looking and looking. And Brian Keith just sits next to him and says, "Wouldn't you like to go, check out the yard or something?" He's like, "No, no, no, no. I'm enjoying this immensely." I mean, and and of course, at the end of The Parent Trap, when Brian Keith remarries Maureen O'Hara, he's there to perform the ceremony, and he just gives Maureen O'Hara a little wink. Just gives her a little wink, and it's just it's wonderful. Now, this, of course, is the famous scene where Eva Marie Saint shoots Cary Grant with blanks. Now, if you see one of the most famous flubs, you can see a little boy behind Eva Marie Saint sitting at the table. He covers his ears, which presumably was from another take, because when he does ultimately get shot, he doesn't have his fingers in his ears anymore. But obviously, they had shot this sequence more than once, and he was preparing himself for the noise that would come about because of the blanks. And of course, Eva Marie Saint drives away in a 1958 Lincoln Continental right under Mount Rushmore. Now, I know you can't really ask the question, well, why don't we see any blood? I mean, we probably should see some blood there. I mean, maybe he should have had a blood bag underneath him just to puncture open, just to give away more of the illusion. But it's fine. It's fine. So we are now 1 hour and 46 minutes and 30 seconds into North by Northwest. We have approximately a half hour to go. And I've kind of more or less run out of things to say, but and this was actually a set with all those fake trees and with the Mount Rushmore in the background. MGM wanted to cut this sequence, but I mean, they spent so much money, setting all this up that it's like, well, no, I mean, we're not going to waste the scene. And here again, Hitchcock had final cut, so it stayed in. Now, this is also not only the 100th birthday of Eva Marie Saint, but it's also the 65th anniversary of when North by Northwest premiered in Chicago. In its Chicago opening, it grossed $46,000 in its first week and $35,000 in the second week. The film grossed $209,000 in its opening week at Radio City Music Hall, setting a record opening at the theater as well as its record non-holiday week gross, and went on to gross $404,000 in just 2 weeks. Its opening at the Music Hall saw it become the #1 film at the U.S. box office, where it remained for 7 weeks at Radio City Music Hall. By the end of August, it had grossed $2.5 million from 139 engagements, or $26.8 million in 2023 dollars. According to MGM Records, the film earned theatrical rentals of $5.7 million in the United States and Canada and $4.1 million, around the world, resulting in a profit of $837,000. The Village Voice ranked North by Northwest as number 49 in its top 250 best films of the century list in 1999. Entertainment Weekly voted it the 44th greatest film of all time. The film ranks at number 98 in Empire's list of the 500 greatest films. The Writers Guild of America ranked the screenplay number 21 on its list of the 101 greatest screenplays ever written. And it's ranked the 40th greatest American film by the American Film Institute. Voted number 28 on the list of 100 greatest films by the prominent French magazine Cahiers du Cinéma in 2008, And in the British Film Institute's 2012 Sight and Sound polls of the greatest films ever made, North by Northwest was ranked 53rd among critics. And in 2022, the film polled ranked 45 among critics. In 2010, The Guardian ranked it as the second best action and war film of all time. North by Northwest was ranked 13th in BBC's 2015 list of the 100 greatest American films. And in 2022, Time Out named North by Northwest the greatest thriller ever made. At the time, Time magazine called the film smoothly troweled and thoroughly entertaining. A.H. Wheeler of the New York Times made it a critic's pick and said it was the year's most scenic, intriguing, and merriest chase. He also complimented the two leads. Cary Grant, a veteran member of the Hitchcock acting varsity, was never more at home than in this role of the advertising man on the lam. He handles the grimaces, the surprised look, the quick smile, and all the daring do with professional aplomb and grace. In casting Eva Marie Saint as romantic vis-a-vis, Mr. Hitchcock has plumbed some talents not shown by the actress heretofore. Although she is seemingly a hard designing type, she also emerges both the sweet heroine and a glamorous charmer. Film critic Charles Champlin saw the film as, quote, an anthology of typical Hitchcockian situations, and was particularly taken by the scene in suspense in which Grant's character avoids death when attacked by a crop dusting plane in the cornfields, which he believed was representative of Hitchcock's finest work. Sight and Sound critic Penelope Houston called it the purest piece of entertainment filmmaking. The London edition of Time Out, reviewing the film nearly half a century after its initial release, commented, 50 years on, you could say that Hitchcock's sleek, wiry, paranoid thriller caught the zeitgeist perfectly. Cold War shadiness, secret agents of power, urban modernism, the ant-like bustle of city life, and a hint of dread behind the sharp suits of affluence. Cary Grant's Roger Thornhill, the film's sharply dressed ad exec who is sucked into a vortex of mistaken identity, certainly wouldn't be out of place in Mad Men. But there's nothing dated about this perfect storm of talent, from Hitchcock and Grant to writer Ernest Lehman, co-stars James Mason and Eva Marie Saint, composer Bernard Herrmann, and even designer Saul Bass, whose opening credit sequence still manages to send a shiver down the spine. Author and journalist Nick Clooney praised Lehman's original story and sophisticated dialogue, calling the film, quote, certainly Alfred Hitchcock's most stylish thriller, if not his very best. In 1995, North by Northwest was selected for preservation in the National Film Registry in the United States Library of Congress. And in June 2008, the American Film Institute revealed its 10 top 10, the best 10 films in 10 classic American film genres. And North by Northwest was acknowledged as seventh in the mystery genre. Now, let me go ahead and finish up with Eva Marie Saint's filmography here so you all can go check out her other films. Like I said, if you haven't seen On the Waterfront yet, make that the first one. Make that the very first one to watch. But I would also recommend A Hatful of Rain from 1957. Now, after North by Northwest, she was directed by Otto Preminger in the 1960 film Exodus and co-starred with Paul Newman in that film, where she played Kitty Fremont. Yes. Now, after Exodus, she in 1962 appeared in a film called All Fall Down with Warren Beatty and Carl Malden. Carl Malden was also in On the Waterfront. In 1965, she was opposite James Garner in 36 Hours, which it's about a Nazi German army doctor who tries to obtain vital information from an American military intelligence officer by convincing him that it is 1950 and World War II is long over. And she also starred in The Russians Are Coming, along with Carl Reiner and Alan Arkin. Grand Prix in 1966, which is a very famous auto racing movie, which won 4 Academy Awards. She would later co-star with Gregory Peck in The Stalking Moon, 1968, Loving with George Segal in 1970, Cancel My Reservation, another Bob Hope film in 1972. And then she would not appear again until 1986 in the comedy Nothing in Common, starring Tom Hanks and Jackie Gleason. She was also in the 1996 Marriott in Ecstasy, I Dreamed of Africa in 2000, Don't Come Knocking in 2005 because of Winn-Dixie. She also played Martha Kent in Superman Returns. And her last film, at least for the time being, was Winter's Tale in 2014 with Colin Farrell. But I remember when I saw Superman Returns with Brandon Routh, when I saw that in the theater, it was just lovely seeing Eva Marie Saint still working. And as far as television is concerned, she did episodes of Suspense, Studio One, Trip to the Bountiful, Martin Caine, Private Eye, Goodyear Television Playhouse, Bob Hope Presents the Chrysler Theater, Christmas to Remember, When Hell Was in Session. She did 6 episodes of Moonlighting, where she played a character named Virginia Hayes. The 1988 television film I'll Be Home for Christmas. She was also in the Daniel Steele adaptation of Palomino, which my mother was a huge Daniel Steele fan, and I remember Palomino only because it's about a woman who gets paralyzed, and but she still wants to ride horses. If I remember correctly, that was Lindsay Frost, yeah, and Rod Taylor and Eva Marie Saint. She was also in an episode of Frasier. And the last thing that she did was she provided the voice of the character of Katara in 6 episodes of The Legend of Korra, which is an animated fantasy action television series, which is... I've heard of this before. I know I have. Yeah, it's a Nickelodeon show. Mm-hmm. All right. Now, let's see. Now, even though I'm a little late, when Cary Grant escapes from the hospital, and he goes out the window, and then he goes into the next room, the woman that gets up from the bed and says, "Stop." I wanted to mention her real quick. Her name is Patricia Cutts, and let's see, she was the first person to portray the character of Blanche Hunt in the ITV soap opera Coronation Street. She was born in London, the daughter of the writer-director Graham Cutts. And her first roles were supporting parts in British films. These ranged from small roles to more substantial ones, such as playing the love interest in Those People Next Door in 1953. She moved to the U.S. in 1958, where she appeared in Alfred Hitchcock Presents and Perry Mason. She played defendant Sylvia Oxman in the 1959 episode The Case of the Dangerous Dowager, and Anne Eldridge in the 1966 episode The Case of the Bogus Buccaneers. And she continued to work consistently in film and television on both sides of the Atlantic throughout the 1950s, including a small appearance in North by Northwest. In 1959, she appeared on Groucho Marx's quiz show, You Bet Your Life. She was a regular panelist on the Dumont quiz, Down You Go, and starred alongside Vincent Price in The Tingler. In 1958, she appeared in the film Mary Andrews, starring Danny Kaye. The following year, she had a good role as the second female lead in the war movie Battle of the Coral Sea, also in 1959. In the 1960s, she made guest appearances on television shows such as The Lucy Show, Car 54, Where Are You?, Adventures in Paradise, and Playhouse 90. After several quiet years, she returned to the UK and was in the 1972 British television series Spider's Web, that's Spider with a Y, before accepting the role of Blanche Hunt in the ITV soap opera Coronation Street. It would have been her most high-profile regular role to date, but after appearing in only 2 episodes, Cutts was found dead at her flat in Chelsea, London, at the age of 48. An inquest into her death produced a verdict of suicide by barbiturate poisoning. So I wanted to mention Patricia Cutts's small role there, where she basically tells Cary Grant to stop as he's about to leave her hospital room. Yeah. But she was also in I Was a Male War Bride, The Adventures of PC-49, The Long Dark Hall, The Man Who Loved Redheads. She was also in a season 2 episode of the Alfred Hitchcock Hour called The Body in the Barn. And her last film was a 1971 British drama called Private Road. What she did was Susan Penn Halligan, Bruce Robinson, and Michael Feast. And that is available on Blu-ray and DVD, courtesy of BFI. Mm-hmm. Now, it's this moment right here where, of course, Martin Landau drops the line of, referring to, it's my woman's intuition. And, of course, he has the same gun that Eve used to shoot Cary Grant at the cafe. Yeah, and James Mason says right here, I think you're jealous. And, here again, as a kid, I thought he was jealous of him being with Eva Marie Saint, when in fact it was the opposite. And right after he shoots him here, he actually does say, it's an old Gestapo trick, pretending to kill an adversary, which was used in the James Bond film The Living Daylights when Bond shoots the new head of the KGB. Now, I might as well go ahead and mention some other roles that Martin Landau was in. I mean, this and Ed Wood, I think, are his 2 most famous roles. But he passed away at the age of 89 in 2017. Yeah, so just 7 years ago, we lost Martin Landau. And I think Eva Marie Saint is the very last one who is still with us, who was involved in this production. I mean, there might be some crew members out there still, but I think she may be the last one. And I love how Hitchcock raises the camera like that. I mean, a great height over water, which of course they're now planning on basically throwing her off the plane. Landau earned Academy Award nominations for his performances in Tucker, The Man in His Dream, as well as Woody Allen's Crimes and Misdemeanors in 1989. Other notable roles include the 1963 version of Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor, The Greatest Story Ever Told, Rounders in 1998, Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow from 1999, as well as the 2015 film Remember, directed by Adam Egoyan and starring Christopher Plummer and Jürgen Prochnow. He headed the Hollywood branch of the Actors Studio until his death in 2017. After auditioning for the Actors Studio in 1955, Martin Landau and Steve McQueen were the only applicants accepted out of 500 who applied. While there, he trained under Lee Strasberg, Elia Kazan, who directed On the Waterfront, and Howard Clerman, and eventually became an executive director with the studio alongside Mark Rydell and Sidney Pollack. Influenced by Charlie Chaplin and the escapism of the cinema, Landau pursued an acting career. At the Actors Studio, became good friends with James Dean. He recalled, James Dean was my best friend. We were 2 young would-be and still yet to work unemployed actors, dreaming out loud and enjoying every moment. We spend lots of times talking about the future, our craft, and our chances of success in the newly different, ever-changing modern world we were living in. In 1957, he made his Broadway debut in Middle of the Night, which was directed by Delbert Mann and starring Frederick March and Kim Novak. This was right after she appeared in Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo. Landau made his first major film appearance in North by Northwest, and Variety praised Landau's performance, writing, "His performance creates individuality and excitement." That same year, he acted in the Korean War film Pork Chop Hill, starring Gregory Peck and directed by Louis Milestone, and the black comedy The Gazebo, starring Glenn Ford and Debbie Reynolds and directed by George Marshall. He appeared on television in Wanted Dead or Alive, which of course starred Steve McQueen, as Korba, a rogue elephant trainer who uses his elephant to rob miners of their gold. The series, the episode aired on January 14th, 1960. Only a month after North by Northwest went into wide release. In 1962, he acted in the Western film Stagecoach to Dancers Rock, and he played the survivor of a post-pandemic world in the Outer Limits episode The Man Who Was Never Born. He had featured roles in two 1960s epics, Rufio in the Joseph L. Mankiewicz-directed Cleopatra, and Caiaphas in the George Stevens-directed The Greatest Story Ever Told. The latter was an historical epic which cost a reported $20 million. And some of the other films he appeared in were Nevada Smith, A Town Called Bastard, The Last Word, Meteor, where he played a major, Without Warning, The Return, Alone in the Dark, where he played a preacher. That's actually a pretty good slasher film directed by Jack Shoulder, who later directed The Hidden. And he was also played the old captain in a 1985 version of Treasure Island. Let's see. He was also in Sliver with Sharon Stone, Intersection with Richard Gere. Then he won the Oscar for Ed Wood in 1994. He was also in City Hall. He played Geppetto in The Adventures of Pinocchio. He also appeared on The X-Files. And he was also in Rounders, Ed TV, Ready to Rumble, The Majestic, directed by Frank Darabont and starring Jim Carrey. And let's see, he also provided a voice in Tim Burton's Frankenweenie. Mm-hmm. Yep. And let's see, his last film looks like it was Abe and Phil's Last Poker Game. It's about a character named Dr. Abe Mendelbaum, played by Landau, who is placed in a retirement home while incapable of managing his wife's decaying health. It was the first feature film by Weiner, a neurologist. It debuted at the 2017 Tribeca Film Festival right before Landau's death. But the assessments on his performance were actually very positive. Mm-hmm. Now, we are now at 2 hours and 8 minutes, 2 hours and 8 minutes into North by Northwest, with approximately 8 minutes left to go. We are coming to the home stretch here. Excuse me. Now, there's the microfilm that's in that little whatever he's carrying there. They refer to it as a pumpkin. And during the escape, when they're in the car, which is coming up here, he says to Roger says to Eve, "I see you've got the pumpkin," meaning Van Damme's statue containing microfilm. The line references the 1948 Alger Hiss case, in which Whittaker Chambers led federal agents to government microfilms allegedly supplied to him by Hiss that Chambers had hidden in a pumpkin on his farm. Mm-hmm. Oh, and finally, before I forget, the house that we see in the movie is actually not real. Now, Alfred Hitchcock asked the set designers to make the set resemble a house by Frank Lloyd Wright, the most popular architect in America at the time, using the materials, foam, and interiors associated with him. The set was built in Culver City, California, where MGM studios were located, and the house exteriors were all matte paintings. But it looks perfectly believable. I mean, like I said, all the shots that were done on the MGM studios, they blend in so well with the real locations that you don't even know. See, just look at that. You can hardly believe that that house is actually a matte painting. It's actually really astonishing. And here they are running from Martin Landau and Adam Williams, who they're tracking to Mount Rushmore. Yeah, it's not good to be on top of the monument right now. And here again, Bernard Herrmann's score gets kicked up to high gear right here as Roger and Eve have no choice but to climb down the Mount Rushmore monument. Now, just to fill in the gap until the very end here, because we have, here again, we have about 5-6 minutes to go. The only actor I haven't really touched upon is James Mason. Now, James Mason, he was also in George Cukor's A Star is Born with Judy Garland, of course. He was also in Stanley Kubrick's Lolita, Warren Beatty's Heaven Can Wait, and Sidney Lumet's The Verdict. He also starred in a number of successful British and American films from the 50s to the 80s, including The Desert Fox, Julius Caesar, Bigger Than Life, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Journey to the Center of the Earth, Georgie Girl, and The Boys from Brazil. He was nominated for an Academy Award 3 times, never won, and he also nominated for 3 Golden Globes and won a Golden Globe for A Star is Born, and 2 BAFTA awards throughout his career. Mason registered as a conscientious objector during World War II, causing his family to break with him for many years. But his tribunal did not exempt him on the requirement for non-combatant military service, which he also refused. He appealed against that aspect of the tribunal's decision, but it became irrelevant once he was included in a general exemption for film work. In 1941 to 42, he returned to the stage to appear in Jupiter Laughs by A.J. Cronin. He established himself as a leading man in Britain in a series of films, including The Patient Vanishes, Hatter's Castle with Robert Newton and Deborah Kerr, The Night Has Eyes, Alibi, Thunder Rock, and The Bells Go Down in 1943. And he became hugely popular for his brooding anti-heroes and occasional outright villains, such as The Man in Grey in 1943. Mason's Hollywood career was revived when he was cast as General Rommel in The Desert Fox, the story of Rommel, directed by Henry Hathaway for 20th Century Fox. He did a film in Republic Pictures, written by his wife and directed by Roy Colino, called Lady Possessed. At Fox, he also played a spy in Five Fingers, directed by Joseph L. Mankiewicz. MGM hired him to play Rupert of Hentzau in The Prisoner of Zenda, 1952. He was in the lower budgeted Face to Face, then went on to Paramount to play a villainous sea captain opposite Alan Ladd in Botany Bay. At Fox, he had a huge hit returning to Jules Verne, science fantasy as the determined Scottish scientist and explorer in Journey to the Center of the Earth. He did a comedy, A Touch of Larceny, and was Sir Edward Carson in The Trials of Oscar Wilde. He continued to appear on television shows like The DuPont Show with June Allison, Golden Showcase, Theater 62, and The Alfred Hitchcock Hour. He did The Marriage Go-Round, then played Dolores' sexually obsessive stepfather, Humbert, in Stanley Kubrick's version of Lolita. In 1963, James Mason settled in Switzerland and embarked on a transatlantic career. He began to drift into support roles or second leads: the epic Fall of the Roman Empire, The Pumpkin Eater with Anne Bancroft, a river pilot who portrays Peter O'Toole's character in Lord Jim, a Chinese noble in Genghis Khan, The Uninhibited, and Dr. Kildare. Now, Adams Williams' death right here, where he falls off the Mount Rushmore, is actually a parallel to how the villain dies in Alfred Hitchcock's Saboteur by falling off the Statue of Liberty. In 1967, James Mason narrated the documentary The London Nobody Knows. An ardent cinephile on top of his career interests, Mason narrated 2 British documentary series supervised by Kevin Brownlow: Hollywood, 1980, on the silent cinema, and Unknown Chaplin, 1983, devoted to outtake material from the films of Sir Charlie Chaplin. Mason had been a longtime neighbor and friend of the actor and director Chaplin. In the late 1970s, he became a mentor to up-and-coming actor Sam Neill, who later starred in Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park. He also supported Charles Bronson in Cold Sweat, 1970, and Lee Van Cleef in Bad Man's River. And The Last of Sheila, 1973. He played the evil Dr. Polidori in Frankenstein, the True Story. And here is James Mason delivering his very last line, which is also very memorable. Well, that wasn't very sporting, using real bullets. And now we have all this Freudian dialogue, which, of course, alludes to Roger and Eva's lovemaking. As they are now married, their marriage is consummated on the train here. And, of course, the final shot of the train going in the tunnel, which screenwriter Ernest Lehman fully credited to Hitchcock as we close out North by Northwest with the pounding sounds of Bernard Herrmann's score. And I think it's kind of appropriate that in Hitchcock's next film, Psycho, we would start with a couple that had just made love in a hotel room. So at any rate, thank you very much for joining me for this commentary on North by Northwest in celebration of Eva Marie Saint's 100th birthday. I hope you all enjoyed it. And I will see you all again very soon for another commentary.